Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see you here. Thank you for coming to Dobbs versus Jackson 1 year later. I'm going to hand it over to the teens very, very shortly. But first wanted to give you a welcome. So I'm Jen Analik. I have the honor of directing the Meyer-Gottesman Koleinu Fellowship and supporting the teens that organized today's event. I'm going to give a brief overview of what Moving Traditions is. Moving Traditions is the organization that is behind Koleinu. So Moving Traditions partners with 185 Jewish organizations nationally to support a full suite of programs that embolden Jewish youth and teens to thrive. We partner with local synagogues and Hebrew schools to offer Bar Mitzvah education. Go to the next slide. Great. And Kulam for high schoolers. And our teen groups provide circles of support for teens in gender-specific yet inclusive communities, Rosh Hodesh, Shevet, and Zelem. And in addition to the Meyer-Gottesman Koleinu Teen Feminist Fellowship, we also offer Kumi, which is a new program to help teens interrupt racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, and other forms of oppression. We offer culture shift training for Jewish professionals and our Raising Up Teens webinar series for parents. And all of these programs are rooted in these three values. We firmly believe that when you give a teen confidence in exactly who they are, shleimut, and connect them to caring communities, chesed, they're more prepared to help make the world a better place, tzedek. And with that, it is my pleasure to hand it over to Noah Glazer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Noah Glazer, and I am a junior at the Abraham Joshua Heschel School, a graduated returning fellow of the Koleinu Fellowship, and the founder of the Moving Traditions Teen Board. The board and I are so excited that you're all here today, and I would love to introduce you to the background of the board, which has so much to do with why we're here. So after experiencing an existential crisis following the Dobbs decision, I was looking for ways to get more involved in activism. And I worked with Moving Traditions staff and mentors to found the Teen Board. And at its core, the board works to do two things. First, it provides teens a groundbreaking opportunity to immerse themselves in the world of Jewish nonprofits. And second, it helps amplify and make space for teen perspectives in the future of Jewish organizations. So the board has worked on 5 initiatives this year. We have developed a teen ambassador program, which creates space for teens in Moving Traditions adult board members. And we're hoping to expand this program to local Jewish nonprofit boards next year. We've reviewed 6 months of Koleinu curriculum and synthesizing our recommendations, as well as developed a prototype website for the fellowship. We're developing curriculum to be implemented this fall for middle school students on civil disagreement and how to productively have differences in opinion. We developed an online Koleinu alumni network, and our 5th and final initiative has been putting together this seminar, addressing the intersection between reproductive rights and Jewish teens, which is truly a passion project of mine. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily Levine to kick off our program. Thank you all so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Levine, a junior at Scarsdale High School and a current Koleinu fellow, and next year a returning fellow. And the Dobbs v. Jackson decision has detrimentally altered the course of reproductive rights across the nation. And for this reason, we are so excited to introduce 3 fantastic panelists to further educate us all on the state of reproductive rights and its intersectionality with Judaism and the law. So with that, I'm going to ask our first panelist question to Dr. Birenbaum. Can you please introduce yourself and what connections you have to reproductive rights?
Yes, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with everyone. I say this morning because I'm out in California on the West Coast, so it is not afternoon here. But my name is Dr. Emily Birenbaum, and I'm in OBGYN. And I, after practicing for close to 20 years as a full scope OBGYN, I left women's health for 8 years because I got interested in end-of-life care. But in the wake of the Dobbs decision, actually, it was in the wake of the leak of the Dobbs decision, I went clamoring back to women's health. I just felt a moral obligation as an OBGYN that I needed to return to women's health in the wake of the Dobbs decision. So I joined a company called Caraway, which is a telehealth mobile platform for primarily geared towards women of college age. So I returned to women's health in the wake of the Dobbs decision.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Birenbaum. Ariela, would you be able to explain your experience with women's rights and constitutional law?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see some Heschel students on this call. Thank you to Emily and Noah for organizing this and inviting me to participate. Thanks to Moving Traditions. So I'm currently the head of school at Heschel, but before doing that, I was a professor of constitutional law and family law at Columbia Law School for 16 years. And my interest has always been, I'm trained as a lawyer and a historian, and my interest has always been in women's rights law, and especially in the stories of change that we tell about how women's rights have been protected within American law and American history. So I do some of that at the Heschel School, but did a lot of it in my prior position at Columbia, and have thought a lot about abortion and its relationship to other rights that impact women's status legally, culturally, socially in America.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So now to introduce our final panelists, Cantor Kleinman, can you please tell us about your involvement with Judaism and reproductive rights?
Sure. So hello, everybody. I'm Amanda Kleinman. I'm the senior cantor of Westchester Reformed Temple, which is Emily's congregation. And we are very proud of Emily. And also I am personally just very inspired by all of you who are joining this conversation today and taking this time to learn more and to mobilize yourselves as well. So thank you very much for having me. This has always been a topic that has been important to me personally and as a human being. And I think the beginning for me of exploring the Jewish perspective around reproductive rights was when I started as a cantor at WRT, and we decided as a clergy team that it was very important to us that abortion and reproductive rights be a part of our 10th grade confirmation curriculum. That gave me an opportunity to start exploring the Jewish perspectives around these issues. And then fast forward several years, I'm actually a native Texan. And as somebody from Texas whose family is still living in Texas, had the opportunity to hear and learn from religious leaders in my home city of Dallas and my home state as they were responding to issues and significant restrictions around reproductive rights in Texas. And then we fast forward again to the Dobbs decision, and I felt a strong obligation as a spiritual leader in a congregation to use the platform that I have, which is the platform of the Bima and also of the classroom, to help make sure that members of my congregation had the opportunity to explore this issue from a Jewish perspective, and most recently delivered a sermon on reproductive rights from the Bima during our Kol Nidre service. And I would say my core goal is to help make sure that members of the Jewish community and of religious communities in general have the opportunity to learn Jewish perspectives on this issue, because I think that many people make assumptions about what the Jewish tradition must have to say about abortion and about reproductive rights, given what they've seen in other media sources and in other religious traditions. And so I think it's important that that religious leaders in the Jewish tradition give their communities the opportunity to learn about and explore these texts further.
Thank you so much. So now going back to Ariela, how has the Dobbs decision changed abortion law throughout the country?
Sorry, you can hear me now, right, Emily? Okay, great. So maybe I'll give 1 minute of background on Dobbs, and then an explanation for how it changed things. So we have a constitution, federal constitution, sets certain rights that states can't take away. Many of those rights are protected under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which was passed in the aftermath of the Civil War. What the 14th Amendment says is that you cannot have certain rights to life, liberty, and property taken away without due process of law. In 1965, in a case called Griswold against Connecticut, the Supreme Court said that part of what is protected under that language of the 14th Amendment is a right to privacy, which basically says that there's a certain sphere of things that states and the government can't take away from you because they're protected by the federal Constitution. In 1973, in a case called Roe v. Wade, which I assume you're all at least passingly familiar with, the Supreme Court said that in that bucket of rights that's protected by the right to privacy lies a woman's decision to make, in consultation with her physician, to decide whether to have an abortion. And from the beginning, what the Supreme Court said is that there's a balance between a woman's interest, her privacy interest in making that decision, and the government's interest in the potential life of the fetus. In 1973, in Roe, that interest was divided into what the court thought of as a trimester framework. So in the first trimester, the woman had the most interest, the greatest interest, and the most power to make a decision. And that interest shifted towards the state as you move from first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. In 1992, it looked like many people thought Roe was going to be overturned in 1992 in a case called Casey against Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania. It was not. Instead, a center of the Supreme Court at the time reaffirmed the central holding in Roe and changed the framework slightly so that what mattered in terms of that shift from the woman's sort of interest to the state's interest was viability, when a fetus is viable, as opposed to trimesters. I'll defer to Dr. Birenbaum on all medical things, but medical technology has shifted alongside legal rules in tricky ways. What Dobbs did last year was say that Roe v. Wade is overturned, that the Roe court got it wrong, and that the right to privacy they did not say there's no right to privacy, right? This is where all of the interesting questions going forward lie. So they did not say there's no right to privacy, but they said that the right to privacy only protects rights that are deeply rooted in our nation's history and tradition, and that abortion was not one of those, and that the Roe v. Wade court got it wrong when they said that it was. So there is no federal constitutional protection for a woman's right to get an abortion. What does that mean? It means states get to do whatever they want. It doesn't mean abortion is necessarily illegal. It means that we have 50 different states, and each state can now pass its own set of abortion regulations and protections, and the federal Constitution has nothing to say about it. So what we've done now is devolve the question of abortion to 50 different states. I'm happy to answer more, but maybe I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much. Dr. Birenbaum, how has the Dobbs decision impacted your ability to provide care to your patients?
So as I said at the outset, I'm in California. California is a very liberal state in terms of the right to access abortion. But as I also said in my introduction, when I returned to women's health, I did so by joining a company called Caraway, whose mission it is to increase access to care in all 50 states. Ultimately, we're a small startup. So we launched in New York and then California, and now we're in 6 states. But I can only provide medication abortion services in 2 of the 6 states where we currently are seeing patients. And that's because each state has their own laws on how a woman can access a right to an abortion. So it hasn't affected other aspects of my delivery of care, in terms of contraception and explaining things about STIs and other things that gynecologists do. But in terms, what brought me back to women's health was the fact that women's rights were now being trampled and taken away, and that somebody who wasn't ready to become a parent was going to be forced into becoming a parent, forced into continuing her pregnancy, laboring and delivering. So as I said, we're currently in 6 states, but because of the restrictions in 4 of the 6 states that we are now practicing in, I can't provide care because they require, say, an in-person visit at some point in order to dispense medication to have an abortion. So only in California and New York can we provide the service. Other states have put restrictions on telemedicine, and that's the platform that Caraway uses.
And Dr. Birenbaum, what do your college students or the college students who are your patients, how do they feel about this? How are they responding? How do you feel about how they respond? Does it give you hope? Does it bother you?
I think what has been sort of the most shocking thing to me is in some ways how little it has come up, and that is in part because we're a young company, and we haven't even been around a full year. I haven't yet had someone come to Caraway needing an abortion. And so really what my mission is to even get ahead of that. And I'm just, I would love to just stand on top of the world and shower contraception down on the entire planet for, so that's really where I'm coming from is, let me just increase access to contraception, gratefully, I suppose. I mean, I don't want to put any qualifiers on it, but no one has come to us yet to access abortion services, but a lot of people come for contraceptive advice. And so that's where my megaphone is just as loud and big as it can possibly be. And I've been surprised that there is a pushback on hormonal contraception. And I am trying to help young women connect the dots about what's reliable contraception and how important it is to have that in the wake of the Dobbs decision, where it's going to be so challenging for a lot of people to access abortion services, if that's what they decide to do, should they find themselves pregnant.
Thank you so much. So now to add more of a Jewish spin onto what we've learned, Cantor Kleinman, what does Judaism say about reproductive rights?
So much of the Jewish conversation around reproductive rights has its roots in a text from the Torah's book of Exodus, which lays out a scenario for us that tells us that if 2 people are fighting, and as a sort of byproduct of that fight, a pregnant woman is pushed over, and a miscarriage ensues, then the person or people responsible for pushing the woman over are required as their consequence to pay a fine. And if we sort of hone in on what the punishment is there, a fine, that tells us something very important that sort of paves the way for the Jewish conversation around abortion and around reproductive rights. Because if you think about the biblical framework of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life, then it's important to note here that the consequence is a fine and not the death of the person who or people who pushed over the pregnant woman. And so what that teaches us in the Jewish tradition is that the fetus holds a status that is different from the status, for instance, of the mother of the fetus or of any of the other people who are involved in that sort of situation. And so that's not to say that the Jewish tradition takes the idea of potential life lightly, because it does not. And there are many additional conversations in the Jewish tradition that discuss different stages of fetal development and what the status of the fetus is during those times. But the value that we can take from this teaching and a number of others in the Jewish tradition is that the life of the pregnant person is the most important value in this conversation. And the Jewish tradition even requires that a pregnancy be terminated if the life of the person who is pregnant is at risk. And so much of the sort of conversation or debate in the Jewish tradition then is actually around the question or the idea of what it means for the life of the mother to be at risk. And so there are a number of different opinions within the Jewish community about what that means, ranging from the life of the mother or the life of the pregnant person being the physical life of a person. So a person's life must be physically at stake for it to be acceptable to terminate a pregnancy, all the way to and you know, many Jewish halachic or legal authorities will say that if the emotional or mental well-being of a person who is pregnant will be impacted, then that would, you know, certainly be a reason for it to be acceptable for a person to terminate a pregnancy as well. So that's sort of where the much of the debate within the Jewish tradition lies. I think it's important to note as well that what we see within the Jewish tradition doesn't necessarily empower a woman or a person who is pregnant to, make her own decisions as much as it empowers a person in consultation with their religious leaders and their clergy to make decisions. And so that's a place where, you know, for me personally, I see what the Jewish tradition lays out for us. And then as a Reform clergy person, look to sort of build upon that. And one of the things that I love about the Jewish tradition's perspectives on reproductive rights is that I think it teaches us that there can be a great deal of nuance within religious traditions around these questions and around these issues. And I think that that's a really important building block in and foundation in the conversations about reproductive rights within religious communities.
Okay, so we have a follow-up that we have in the chat about what your experience has been with teens and reproductive rights, and if you had any interactions with how teens have like spiritually responded to Dobbs.
Well, it's a great question, and I hope it's okay, Emily, if I can put you on the spot a little bit, because I think you're really one of the people who's been most inspiring to me in your own response. And you took the opportunity, following your confirmation year and the opportunity to learn a little bit about this issue as part of our confirmation class, to speak about it from the Bima at your confirmation service, and then to speak about it again with our congregation later that summer. And so, I would say I've certainly had the opportunity to see teens who have really mobilized around this issue, and I hope to see it further as well.
Great. So Ariela, how have you used your knowledge in constitutional law as the head of the Heschel School? And what do you think teens can do to be more educated on their rights, particularly as they go to different states for college?
So, on a daily basis, I don't use constitutional law, except in the classroom when I am lucky enough to teach seniors constitutional law. For me, the overarching sort of piece that links my Jewish work with my legal work is really about the power of text and interpretation. Right? Roe, Dobbs, any issue that you care about that has constitutional roots, there are multiple ways to look at that text, right? The Constitution is an old text. I consider it a sacred text in many ways, but reasonable minds can disagree about what it means. And it's extremely powerful. It's a powerful text, right? Your rights might literally turn on how you read the 14th Amendment, which is old language that has been interpreted different ways for hundreds of years. And in that respect, this is in some sense a very Jewish project to me. So I think that recognizing in the Jewish texts that are sacred to us and the American texts that are sacred to us, recognizing your power as a Jew, as an American, as a member of different communities, your power to really master a set of skills of interpretation that will let you work with other people to build movements and power around the issues you care about. That to me is like the common core of the work I hope you'll do as Jews and the work I hope you'll do as either Americans or citizens of some other community where your voice should matter. So, my number one passion is empowering teens and really everybody to understand that you need to listen to different interpretations of text. You can't build your own interpretation in an echo chamber. And the best way to fight for what you believe in is to really appreciate the power of your interpretive skills in conversation with others. So to me, that's really the linkage between the sort of Jewish passions I have and the American legal passions I have, and what I hope everyone going off to college in whatever state you're in takes with you, which is that you're as powerful as the skills and the communities that you build, and to not do so in an echo chamber where you're not going to be as equipped as you can to really make the most forceful argument for what you believe in.
Great. And a follow-up. Can you talk about like those you just mentioned, those similarities that between how you personally interpret the Torah and how you personally interpret the Constitution, and really what types of questions through that interpreting that you've asked that have helped guide you most in coming to really formative answers?
So I guess for me, I see really all documents as living documents. And this is a foundational sort of disagreement that members of the Supreme Court have, and that different rabbinic interpretive paths have. There are members of the Supreme Court who consider themselves what we would call originalists in some form, right? This text means what it meant when it was written, and that's what we're bound to. Justice Scalia, who's no longer alive, but is like the probably greatest exponent of that view. And then there are people, Justice Breyer is probably the greatest exponent, who say, no, the Constitution is a living text. So for me, both in my Jewish life and in my legal life, I tend to see foundational texts as living documents, who are documents that are open to different interpretations, some more valid than others. I don't mean to suggest that every view you take to a text is equally valid, but if you master the history of either, right, a biblical text, a rabbinic text, a constitutional text, my own view is these meanings evolve over time and should evolve over time. And, I think that's, to me, how I think about their power fundamentally.
Thank you so much for sharing. Our next question is for Cantor Kleinman. So how has the Dobbs decision impacted religious freedoms and Jewish teens across the nation, as well as communities that maybe aren't your congregation, but you're a part of just as a normal person?
Sure. I think that the answer to that question is certainly somewhat dependent on what area of the country people find themselves in. As I shared, I'm from Texas originally, and I know that with the passage of SB 8 in Texas, which banned abortion after a heartbeat, was could be detected, which is usually around 6 weeks, that a number of my colleagues in congregations in Texas were concerned that they could be held liable legally for providing counseling to their congregants. And that was something that was very scary for them. And so that's just one example of what I hear from, colleagues who are in parts of the country with laws that are more restrictive. I will say, in addition to that, certainly an issue around freedom of religious practice has come up, in that, as I shared previously, there are certain instances in which the Jewish tradition actually requires that a pregnancy be ended if the life of the person who is pregnant is at stake. And so obviously, if there are restrictions around abortion in a particular area, that would then interfere with a person's ability to practice their religion, to practice Judaism. I think for me, at least, and I'm not the legal scholar here, but it's important for us to walk sort of the fine line around that issue, in that I think we don't want to be saying the law should be in line with the Jewish tradition if the separation of church and state is something that's important to us. And so I think it's very important to keep that in mind as well, while at the same time recognizing that there is a freedom of religion, of expression of religion issue that is coming up for people who feel unable to follow the teachings and laws of the Jewish tradition, given restrictions to reproductive rights around the country.
Thank you so much. So now for our final panel question, we're going to ask Dr. Birenbaum, what do you think is important for teens to know about their rights surrounding reproductive health?
Teens have a right to information that is medically accurate, inclusive, and age appropriate in order to make informed decisions about their own sexual behavior, relationships, and reproductive choices. Not all states require sex ed, and the required content varies widely. It should be including information, not just sort of the birds and the bees, as it were, but real accurate, clear education about anatomy, about birth control options, and how to prevent STIs, how to protect yourself. Everyone should have access to contraception, prenatal services, safe and legal abortion, and safe childbirth. So everyone should feel comfortable talking to a trusted person, be that your doctor, someone in your community, anyone in your community, but teens have a right to the information that's medically accurate.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Birenbaum, and to all of our panelists. With that, we are going to thank you for all of the knowledge that you've shared with us and hand it over to Rabbi Barry Silver, who we are so excited is joining us today. Barry, can you please introduce yourself and just your involvement with Judaism, activism, and reproductive rights?
Sure. My name is Barry Silver, and I'm the rabbi of Congregation Lador Vador, founder of the local chapter of the Temple of Understanding, which unites the religions of the world together to try to protect our planet and its inhabitants. I'm a civil rights, abortion rights attorney, former legislator, and a songwriter. Got plenty of parodies and adaptations, especially about my favorite politicians, and also a couple of them on abortion as well. I filed the first lawsuit after Dobbs, which invoked Jewish law as a basis for challenging the anti-choice ruling or legislation in Florida we call HB 5. And I've been very active in sharing my litigation with people all over the country so that they could file similar lawsuits all around. I also find it abhorrent that people who are older, who no longer are sexually active or as sexually active as they might want to be, are rather jealous of teens and teenagers. And so they seek to restrict their right to enjoy a healthy sex life because they don't have one anymore. And it's kind of like they're angry and they're spiteful and they have no business telling young people. It's kind of like I coach basketball and my son was really good and I was coaching him. And one day I told him he was doing something, he shouldn't do it this way. And my older brother said, no, you're wrong, Barry, you're old school. These kids, that's how they play today. It's a better way of playing. And I yielded. I said, you're right. So we need to take cues from the young people, not be telling them what to do. This heartbeat bill that they passed in Florida, it's ridiculous because the people who tried to pass it, who did pass it, they lack a heartbeat. They don't have a heart. And the fetus doesn't have a heart either at 6 weeks, because it doesn't have a heart at 6 weeks. It's just electrical chemical energy. It's not a heartbeat. The laws that they're passing throughout the country criminalize Jewish law. And I'm not afraid of being arrested. I welcome it. I'm violating Florida law right now by suggesting that women should defy the law and have abortions according to their own religion, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever it is. I'm not afraid of these people. And they have the right to take the Bible and to misinterpret it, mistranslate it. And they have the right to do that. And they have the right to practice it themselves. What they don't have the right to do is to take the Bible and mistranslate it, and then inflict their mistranslations upon the people who wrote it, who can read it in the original, and tell us that now you must follow our misunderstanding of your biblical law. That they don't have the right to do, and the Constitution doesn't let them do it either. I could go on for hours on this, but I'll stop here. And I'll just say one other thing: to equate a fetus with a human life from the get-go as a fertilized egg, to say that fertilized egg is now a human life is like calling an acorn an oak tree, or saying that when you're eating scrambled eggs, you're really eating fried chicken, or to say that if you burn down the blueprints of a house, you just committed arson. It's confusing potentiality. This is not a human being according to Jewish law, reason, or science, or anything else at fertilization. It makes absolutely no sense. But the people who are behind this are irrational. They're brainwashed, they're indoctrinated, they're not thinking rationally, and they want to inflict their irrational views upon the rest of us. And in Judaism, we fight back. And in all, we have a lot of allies across the religious spectrum fighting back, fortunately, and not taking this.
Thank you so much, Barry. So can you talk about the lawsuit itself and what was the public response, how it affected you personally, and how it affected your community specifically?
Yeah, when the Dobbs decision came out, I knew that there was going to be some mischief here in Florida because we have a lunatic named DeSantis who thinks that his wife made a commercial saying on the 8th day, God created a defender to defend his law, and that was DeSantis. So we already knew that we were going to have problems. So he passed something called HB 5, which criminalized abortion after 15 weeks. And so I've done abortion litigation for years. And so I filed a lawsuit. I had it ready to go in the can. As soon as the thing became effective, we filed a lawsuit based on First Amendment, saying that you can't establish a religion. That law that they passed established a Christian view of religion, and not a majority Christian view, a minority Christian view of religion for everyone. And they said from now on, everyone has to follow our brand of Christianity. They also, there's a flip side to the First Amendment. There's the Establishment Clause. You can't establish a religion for everyone, and you also can't prevent the free exercise of religion. And as was mentioned in Judaism, abortion is not just available or acceptable, it's required. It's required of a woman if it's going to affect her, not just her life, her health. There's a lot of horrible things that can happen to women if they don't have access to abortion on time. And to suggest, well, we'll just wait around until you're about to die, and then if death is imminent, then you can have an abortion. That's outrageous. And how dare men who don't have to go through any difficulties at all, they just get the fun part. How dare they tell women who risk their lives, who go through all types of vicissitudes to bear children. They should be kissing the ground women walk on and say, thank you so much for going through that so I could be born and so that the race could continue. Instead, they're telling women that they have to go through potentially not just risk to their life, but health risks. And the risks are serious to your internal organs if you wait too long to have an abortion that's necessary. And this is going on right now. So we found it based on First Amendment and also freedom of speech, saying that you're not allowed now to speak out about abortion because it's now criminalized, because you could be considered aiding and abetting someone who wants to have an abortion in defiance of the law. We also filed under something that you don't really need to worry about, but it's called RFRA, Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. And this is something that Christians have relied on for years to be able to impose their religion on others. And we have the right as Jews, also in all religions, to use the same law. There's some people who are uncomfortable with it. They say, wait, you're using a law that's been used to support fundamentalist Christianity. Well, if it's good enough for them, then they can see what it's like if we attempt to use it. So we filed a lawsuit based on First Amendment, based on freedom of speech, based on right of privacy, which we have in Florida, and also based on this law called RFRA, which is like the First Amendment on steroids. It's a very, very strong protection of abortion rights. We also gather allies and protest and demonstrate and go to the streets. How it's affected me, I'm just glad that I'm able to use my background as an attorney and a rabbi and a former legislator to be able to put all that together and to file this lawsuit. We drew a judge who's not very sympathetic to our cause. He was appointed by a Republican governor, but we're still in the midst of litigation of sending out some rather devastating discovery interrogatories, requests for admissions, probably going out tomorrow. So we're still fighting hard on this.
So something you began to touch on in your response was about being a man in the realm of reproductive rights. And what has that experience been like? And what kind of reactions have you received as a man who is fighting endlessly to help protect the rights of women?
Well, it's really gratifying to see that the National Organization for Women, not of women, for women, meaning that they also have men in the organization, was kind enough to award me the Feminist of the Year in the Palm Beach County chapter, which hasn't happened before. It's on their 50th anniversary. It's a beautiful event, and I made all the male members of my congregation, I paid for them to become members of NOW. So all of the male members are members of NOW. I was also given the privilege of speaking at the statewide NOW conference. The response has been incredible. And I'm sure everybody here knows, because I know we have a bunch of activists here, you know the joy of fighting for something you believe in and taking a stand. It's really quite remarkable. I've had my share of death threats as well, and some people who don't really appreciate what I'm doing, but that just gives me the sense that I must be doing something right. If I'm antagonizing the fundamentalists, then that's probably a good thing. It was Thomas Paine who said that trying to use reason with someone who no longer practices rational religion is like administering medicine to a corpse. So there are people that are immune from rational thinking, unfortunately, and you can't really do much about them. But I don't get angry with them. I'm not upset with them. Just like if a rabid dog was going to come and attack my family, I wouldn't be mad at the dog. I would just feel sorry for the dog and try to protect my family. I feel we all need protection from these people because they think they're doing something good. And what's really going on is this, and some people might take offense at what I'm saying. If I offend anyone, I assure you it's completely intentional. Let me just share with you that what's really going on is that there are people who think they speak for God. Okay? They think that they have a pipeline to God, and God has revealed himself to them through Christian scripture, and they're now saved through accepting a human sacrifice, and they're saved and everybody else is going to hell. So they feel they have a moral obligation to inflict, I say, or share, they would say, their Christian views upon everybody else and create a Christian theocracy in the United States in which Christianity now becomes the law of the land, and their version of Christianity now is going to determine whether you can have an abortion or the environment or all types of other things. These folks do not speak for all Christians. Most Christians are very good, loving, rational thinking, pro-choice people. These are people who take a very literal fundamentalist approach to Christianity, and they're trying to inflict that on other people. We've seen the results of that in history. It was called the Crusades, the Inquisition, the pogroms, the Holocaust, the rise in anti-Semitism today in the United States. We've seen where that leads. In fact, the founding fathers knew where it leads. That's why they erected a barrier, a wall of separation between church and state, because as James Madison said, we don't want the soil of the United States soaked in blood, as it was in Europe when Christianity became the law of the land. We don't want to see that. It's not an anti-Christian position. It's an anti-fundamentalist position. We have allies, strong allies, among the Christian community who are even more appalled and ashamed at what their co-religionists are doing. But it's very gratifying to see people of all backgrounds, all ages, all religions coming together and joining together to try to prevent the infliction of one religion upon everyone and to share what this country is really all about. And while I have teenagers here that I'm speaking to, I couldn't go on without saying, it's an extremely dangerous ideology when you believe that this world is destined to be destroyed in Armageddon, and then Jesus will come back and all of his followers will live happily ever after in heaven, and all the people that are not brainwashed are going to be burning in hell. This view demeans this planet and this world. This world is of no consequence. It's just a way station until we decide whether you go up or down. What that means is that they don't care in general about the destruction of the planet. And that is one of the worst, it is the worst crime towards humanity and towards young people. We're destroying the planet for future generations. And these folks couldn't care less because they're more interested in the next world than this one. And overpopulation is the main driving force. And not allowing women to have control over their own bodies and their own reproductive system is a very strong driving force towards overpopulation. Our goal should be that all children should be wanted children. And before we bring more life into an already overcrowded world, we should make sure that that life is wanted. We shouldn't be forcing parenthood on people who are ill-equipped and not ready for parenthood. This is a very, very bad thing. But if you can't think rationally, you just don't see the harm that you're inflicting on other people.
Thank you, Barry. So what do you see as the key intersection between reproductive rights and Judaism? And how do your personal spiritual views and beliefs impact how you view that intersection?
Well, I practice something called cosmic Judaism. It's based on the unity of science and religion. And so I don't believe in any supernatural beings. I don't believe in any supernatural abodes. I believe in Jewish values and ideals and our indomitable spirit and the ideals of Rahmanis, of compassion and love and challenging the status quo. So the way it intersects is that my understanding of Judaism is based on texts from Judaism. I don't necessarily take them literally, but many times they're a guide. In Judaism, human life begins at birth. And by the way, Christian scripture has adopted all of Jewish scripture and called it the word of God. So if Judaism considers life to begin at birth, then they should also, if they read their Bible. So in Genesis, it said God breathed life into humans and then they lived. It also says in Ezekiel and the dry bones that God breathed life into the dry bones and they lived, which means that breathing is equated with the onset of human life. There's also a chapter in Numbers 5:31 where God, he performs an abortion. If a woman is suspected of not being faithful and she's pregnant, they take her to the priest, he does some magic potion, some hocus pocus, and then God causes an abortion to happen, a miscarriage, if it's not the husband's child. We can look at this as nonsensical, but if you believe that God wrote the Torah and this is God's word, then God's performing abortions. By the way, he performs a lot more abortions if you believe in the supernatural being than any human does, because over half of the fertilized eggs, over half of the zygotes don't implant properly or suffer a miscarriage beyond the knowledge even of the woman. They're not aware of it. And so half of these, what they call human beings at birth, at conception, half of them at least are killed by natural causes, meaning God takes these into his hands. So the idea that life begins at conception is a misconception. And the Bible has a pregnant silence regarding abortion, if you'll pardon the expression. There's no laws against abortion in the Bible, Jewish or Christian, meaning that it's pro-choice. You could say, well, maybe they didn't know about it. They did. They knew about it. They legislated against it. The surrounding culture said you can't do it. Jewish scripture said you can, because women's rights were always a step ahead in Jewish law compared to other cultures. It's many steps behind American law today, but compared to contemporaneous cultures, it was ahead. So Jewish law and my Jewish practice leads me to believe that we should use reason and compassion to guide us in our decision making. And I believe very strongly in the words of Tuvia Bielski, who was a partisan fighter who led many people to fight against the Nazis. And he said that freedom begins with an act of defiance. Jews have always defied wayward authority. I think that's why we wear a talit. It's got a lot of fringes on it. And we never hesitate to stand on the fringe of society when necessary to challenge the status quo. That's what being Jewish is all about. It's challenging the status quo and challenging laws that are not fair and not compassionate. So my Judaism leads me, not just me, it leads millions of Jews throughout the world, throughout history and today, to challenge these laws and to speak up. And we know the danger of silence in Judaism. We know that all it takes for the triumph of evil is for good people to do and say nothing. And so we are very active, the Jewish people, in challenging this and other laws that are harmful.
Thank you. And finally, Barry, to close us out, if you could give young activists any piece of advice in the fight for reproductive rights, what would it be?
Don't be afraid. Don't be fearful of what people will think or people will do. And please don't be afraid to use your rational mind, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. I have so many people that tell me, I don't think you should have said that. I said, is it true? Oh yeah, it's true, but I don't think you should say it because somebody's going to be offended by it. You know, 6 million Jewish people died in the Holocaust because of a lie that the Jews killed Jesus. I'm not going to go into all the ways we know that that's a lie, but millions of Christian kids are being taught that lie in a movie called The Passion of the Christ. To challenge that lie that the Jews killed Jesus, the whole story is completely fabricated and made up. To challenge that lie has caused me heaps of problems. I get flack from many organizations, from my own congregants, from many people. But on my watch, I will not be silent about this lie, which has led to the death of Jews throughout history, including the Holocaust, including today. You know, the 2 shooters in the synagogues, the 2 synagogue shooters, both were motivated by Christian scripture. How dare we be silent when millions of Jews have died because of those lies, and just wait for the next outbreak to occur? People say, well, it's not happening now. No, it's not happening now, but it's like a bacillus, it's a virus, it's latent. And when certain conditions are right in society, then people unleash anti-Semitism. We're experiencing it now. These anti-abortion laws are the tip of the spear of anti-Semitism. They're telling Jewish people, you don't have the right to be Jewish, you don't have the right to practice Judaism. We'll tell you what it means, what the Bible means by it. We'll tell you what your law is going to be. And they say it's a Judeo-Christian country. It's not. The Christian scripture says, obey ye every law of man or God. They believed in the divine right of kings. They opposed the Revolutionary War because they said these kings are appointed by God. Jews, on the other hand, starting from Moses, who challenged Pharaoh, and David, who was challenged by Nathan, and the prophets who challenged the kings, Jews don't believe in the divine right of kings. We don't believe that we should just sit back and watch. Be active. Our planet is in dire straits, and I'm sure everyone on this Zoom call is far more aware of that than all of the people in Congress. I know that we're more aware of that. It's going to take very strong, drastic action. It's going to take idealism. It's going to take the Jewish indomitable spirit and the intelligence and the fortitude to challenge the status quo. If we continue going the way we are, we're going to be in extremely sad shape. And I'll just close with this. The Torah tells us, God, it's quoting God, which I say again, I don't take literally, but I do take these stories to have some intrinsic value in what they can teach us. God says, I call upon you, heaven and earth as witnesses, that you have before you life and death. Therefore choose life. We are now seeing smoke coming in from the forests that are burning in Canada. We see a bunch of smoke. What we don't see are the billions of animals who are burned to death, who are running in fear and terror, who are being massacred by these fires, and we don't see the dire consequences. Heaven and earth, the fires of the earth and the heavens that are smoky are witnessing against us about what we're doing to the planet. And we need young people to speak out and to take a stand and to not just walk idly by. And I'm glad to see that everyone on this Zoom call is aware of what I'm saying, or you wouldn't be here. And I thank you for your activism. Keep it up. It's not just something that it's a waste of our time. It's essential to our survival. And the Jewish people, we've been called upon to do things far more important than worry about whether we're mixing milk and meat, or whether we're going to synagogue a few times a week, or whether we're wearing something on our head. These things are trivial and irrelevant. To be Jewish means to protect the planet and to protect its inhabitants. And we need to do that now more than ever, or the future will be very bleak. But I'm optimistic. I know that young people working with elders and people of all faiths and religions, we can and we shall overcome. And I thank you very much for allowing me to share a few words with you. If anybody has any questions, or if you agree with me, I'd like to hear from you. And if you disagree with me, I'd like to hear from you even more, because I'm very open to a discussion and dialogue. So thank you very much for allowing me a few minutes with you.
Barry, on behalf of the Teen Board and everyone here, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. We are all in awe of the amazing work that you do and are inspired by your advice. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Emily to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So just to echo what Noah just said, on behalf of the Moving Traditions Board, we thank each and every one of you, both participants and speakers, for pausing your lives in order to make time for coming today. And as a current junior in the midst of finals, I know just how difficult it can be to make time for outside learning. And I encourage you all to help educate the people around you and find ways to aid in the fight for reproductive rights. So please fill out the Google form sent in the chat so we can learn from each and every one of you, and have a great rest of your weekend and good luck on all of your finals.